Hey, good afternoon to you. It is 4:06 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up here on the program, we've got Adam Kredo from the Free Beacon joining us at 4:30. The Biden administration once again trying to manipulate the language you use to describe the world's problems. And Matthew Boyle joins us at 5 o'clock from Breitbart. We talked to him about the role that RFK's campaign and his new running mate are going to play this year in the election. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. The economy is not doing that great, despite what the White House keeps insisting. Oh, it's doing fantastic. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen was on MSNBC this week, and here's what she had to say about the state of the economy.
So what I want Americans to see is how successful the president's agenda, which is not just a short-term agenda, but a medium and longer-term agenda that is designed to...
It's another way of saying there's not going to be results yet. They'll happen years from now.
Create good jobs in parts of the country that in many ways have been left behind, and making us more secure and bringing down costs for Americans.
Oh, is that convincing? Well, here's a question for you. Why has the White House stopped using the phrase Bidenomics? Did you know that they've stopped? Yeah, the only people really using the phrase Bidenomics are conservatives these days. In fact, Axios has a report today. For the first time in more than 2 months, President Biden, Tuesday, that's yesterday, publicly uttered the word that he and other Democrats have largely abandoned, Bidenomics. And it only came after Axios sent the White House a request for comment saying, why isn't Biden saying Bidenomics? Apparently, they had him say it once during his event yesterday in North Carolina. Why have they abandoned it? For more on that, I want to turn to EJ Antoni, the in-house economist for the Vince Colonnese Show and a research fellow at the Heritage Foundation. EJ, great to have you as always, sir.
Vince, thank you for having me.
So Bidenomics, the White House has abandoned it, but the White House's critics haven't. Why is that?
Well, you tend to abandon things that aren't working. So from that standpoint, I think it makes sense that the White House isn't using the term anymore. And on the flip side, if you're an opponent of the White House, well, using the term Bidenomics is a pretty accurate way to describe the failures of this administration.
Yeah, you've written, as you do each and every week, about the state of our economy right now. The White House keeps pointing to the consumer price index as a way to measure inflation. And they keep telling us inflation is coming down. And what they really mean by that is that prices are still going up, but they're going up more slowly now than they used to. And so that should be encouragement to us. But you insist, or you suggest that the way that the government reports on, quote, inflation is pretty misleading because it doesn't actually address how the average person lives. What do you mean?
Well, a lot of times when we talk about inflation, we're using things like the Consumer Price Index, which is essentially a collection of goods and services that the Bureau of Labor Statistics measures every month, actually 3 times a month, and then they publish once a month their findings as to how much those things have increased in price. The problem is that particular basket of goods and services is not really reflective oftentimes of what the typical American is buying. That's especially true when we have these periods of rapid price increases, because something we've talked about before, consumers will shift their spending habits to try to counter how much prices have gone up. So maybe I don't buy steak tonight. I go out and I just buy some ground beef because it's the cheaper alternative. Well, things like the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, are missing those changes.
Right, and I didn't realize this until you wrote about it, that the CPI, Consumer Price Index, also measures the price of things like luxury products, hotel stays, entertainment services. Well, in a tough economy, of course hotel prices would probably come down if fewer people are actually going on vacation and staying in hotels, right?
Right. So yeah, the common man is not really out there spending their money on cruises right now because they're having trouble making ends meet. They're just trying to get from paycheck to paycheck and figure out, how do I pay the rent and my groceries and not have to put either of them on credit cards?
Yeah.
And so those things that are considered luxury items, that are the non-necessities, those matter less and less. And that's why there are some other really valuable tools out there that are important to look at, like the Common Man CPI, something that's put out by a Wall Street firm named Strategas. And Basically, what it does is it only looks at necessities. It doesn't look at any of those luxuries or those non-necessity items. And what that has found is that the rate of inflation, again, of just necessities, has gone up much faster than the rate of the overall CPI.
So when we hear the number, well, prices are up 18% since the beginning of the Biden administration. It's actually up more than that for necessities.
Right, exactly. Because again, that overall number is measuring a lot of things that people are buying less and less. And that decrease in demand has put downward pressure on price. But meanwhile, what is everyone else buying? Everyone is still buying the necessities. In fact, the demand for those necessities has actually increased because, again, you will have plenty of people, especially in the middle class, who are deciding to now skip out on things that they usually would spend money on. Again, maybe a nice steak like a filet or a nice bone and ribeye. And instead, I'm going to buy that ground beef, something that was disproportionately purchased by lower income families to begin with. So demand for those things has gone up, which further increases price on top of the inflationary increase. Interesting.
Okay. That makes sense to me. I do think one of the sleeper pieces of data that you constantly bring up, but I hear very few places talk about, is what's happening in the job market with full-time jobs. And the White House keeps bragging about the jobs numbers, but what they don't disclose is that we are losing full-time jobs with each passing month, and that all of the new job creation is part-time work. I mean, that seems like a huge blaring alarm.
Well, absolutely. And I think a big reason, Vince, why people are not talking about this is they just don't understand the statistics. They don't understand the numbers that are really being reported. And not only are we losing full-time jobs and only gaining part-time jobs, but on top of that, who is getting the jobs? It's all foreign-born workers. Native-born Americans are actually losing jobs. We're down 1 million net in terms of net job creation since before the pandemic, 4 years ago. Think of that. In 4 years, not only has it been no progress for Americans, but they've actually gone backwards. And then if we also want to look at where are the jobs, it turns out only 15%, 15 of the metro areas in the entire country are gaining jobs. The other 85% either aren't gaining or are losing jobs. So this has been an incredibly uneven recovery in the labor market.
How much is government hiring responsible for some of these jobs numbers?
Well, believe it or not, we've had multiple months now where if you take out essentially government-sponsored jobs, then the change in jobs would turn negative. The reason I say government-sponsored is because not only do you have a disproportionate amount of government hiring, in other words, a literal government job over the last 3 years, but you've also seen a huge surge in the jobs that are paid for by the government. That's especially true in the healthcare sector, where government funding is going to places like hospitals who are hiring people. So if you take away that government funding, what happens? You're going to also take away the jobs that funding pays for.
And you've told me the numbers before on this, but how many American workers working for private companies does it take to finance one government job?
You know, it's going to vary, Vince, pretty widely. And the reason I can give you some hard numbers. If you want to just do a very rough average, it's about 10 or 11 to 1. But the reason I say it can vary considerably is because of what we're seeing right now in terms of private sector job creation are not the high-paying jobs that would get you to that 10 or 11 to 1 ratio.
Yeah.
Instead, what we're seeing, again, with these part-time jobs is you're getting much less tax revenue per job, and so you need a lot more of them to support the typical government job. So instead of 10 or 11 to 1, you're looking at about 20 to 1. And unfortunately, we're nowhere near that ratio. Several months, it's more like 3 or 4 to 1.
Totally unsustainable. And boy, that's something that, again, receives no attention whatsoever. That's a really important detail. I want to shift gears to the disaster of the collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge yesterday in Baltimore. The impact on that port seems like it's going to have some long tails, like for the American economy. In fact, Pete Buttigieg, the transportation guy, was asked about this today what is going to happen. He was asked in the White House press briefing when it comes to inflation and supply chain disruptions. Here's how he answered. Take a listen. Here is Pete Buttigieg.
On inflation.
Too soon to say. I think, this is definitely a different ballpark from what we saw with the West Coast issues in 2021. But that's part of what we hope to gather more data on soon. I will say, a lot of the disinflation that we've seen has been a result of the work that the president led to improve and smooth out our supply chains.
Where's that phrase? Disinflation. That's a fun new phrase. All right, let's just start with the basics, though, here. Will, in your view, EJ Antoni, the closure of the Port of Baltimore, at least for now, they say it's indefinite because they don't actually know when they're going to get all of these ports back up and running. That is going to have an impact on prices, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can't tell me that all of a sudden stopping a significant portion of our international trade is not going to affect prices. Look, if all of a sudden you can't import all of these cars, which was one of the big transactions done in the Port of Baltimore, we used to import a lot of foreign automobiles through there. You can't tell me that drastically reducing that supply, even if it's just temporary, is not going to have an impact on prices. Now, we are fortunate to have a decent stockpile in much of the supply chain so that we're not going to immediately see a huge spike. But if they don't get this resolved soon, which given how they handled the disaster in East Palestine, I mean, my goodness, I don't think we should have any expectation that they're going to have this resolved soon, that they're going to have the port open so that ships can access it. So over time, yeah, I think it's pretty easy to assume that we are going to see some large supply disruptions and therefore some big price impacts.
Yeah, a reporter also asking Pete Buttigieg about the broader impact on the economy. Here's how he answered.
You expect, because of those supply chain issues, that we could see impacts on the U.S. economy as a result of those supply chain issues?
We want to get a little more fidelity on how disruptive it can be. Again, we're not talking about a single point of failure, that it's the only possible place to get through, or even something that is as impactful as some of the issues that affected the Panama Canal, for example. This does not automatically mean that a trip to the East Coast has to be substituted with a trip to the West Coast, which would be much more of a cost impact. It can probably be accommodated up and down the East Coast, but the effect clearly will not be trivial.
That seems like the entire answer to the question. The effect clearly will not be trivial. In other words, Americans will feel this.
Right. It's amazing. You could cut out literally everything except his last sentence, and it would have been the exact same answer. Of course, it's not going to be trivial. Look, you're talking about taking a huge portion, again, of our international trade and having to reroute it. And it's not simply a matter of saying, okay, Norfolk, Philly, and New York all have some excess capacity, and therefore it's going to fit in. No, you have to not only get that trade off the ship or onto the ship, depending on if it's an import or an export, but then you have to truck it around the East Coast, or you have to use a train, and that's going to have another increased cost. And speaking of, if you have to send it by truck, very few people have addressed the fact that this is going to cause a lot more truck traffic around Baltimore, and a decent number of that truck traffic can't use the Baltimore Harbor, the two tunnels. It's going to have to go all the way around the West Loop around Baltimore on 695. So that's going to increase fuel costs. It's going to increase traffic. It's amazing.
Yes.
The secretary really doesn't seem to have any kind of concept of just how disruptive this is going to be.
And that's, by the way, those mandates for the trucks, that's particularly required because of the handling, for instance, of hazardous loads, that it has to be taken on the surface roads and can't be taken out of the tunnels.
Exactly. And, a lot of times when we think of hazardous materials, we think of, very caustic chemicals, let's say, but this even applies to something like a tanker carrying gasoline or a truck that's carrying propane cylinders. None of those things can use those tunnels.
Yeah, it's going to have a far-reaching impact. EJ Antoni, as always, in-house economist for the Vince Coglianese Show and an economist at the Heritage Foundation. Sir, thank you very much for your time today, sir. Okay, let's go to the phones. I've got Jonathan calling in from McLean on line 1. Hello, Jonathan. You are on the Vince Coglianese Show. Hi, Jonathan.
Yeah, don't you think it's great that a supposed billionaire who never attends church, or maybe like once every 10 years, is hawking $60 Bibles with American flags on them Can it get any tackier and cheesier and more pathetic than that?
He's talking. So Jonathan is talking about. I guess Trump he's endorsing. I'm not even sure what the financial arrangement is, but he's holding up a Bible and selling it. He had an American flag on the bottom of it. I don't know the economics of it. I do know that it makes me uncomfortable. I think putting a Bible anywhere close to politics makes me uncomfortable. So I agree with you there. But again, thanks, Jonathan, for your call. Not actually what Jonathan said he was calling about. He just lied about that. So much for integrity. Let me see here. I've got Tim who's calling in from Cross Junction, Virginia, line 2. Tim, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hi, how you doing today?
I'm good, sir.
Hey, I just wanted to get your take with you got Cornel West and you got Robert Kennedy Jr.
Yeah,
possibly getting on in these states, the swing states and things like that. Who these voters that are going to vote for them? Would they be people who would normally stay home if it's just Biden, or are they would come to the polls anyway and then switch their votes over? And the reason I'm asking is, if they're staying home and then coming out for these two candidates, how would that affect the down ticket vote?
This is such a thoughtful question. I was getting text messages as I was talking about this earlier, including from John Lott. He texted me about this too. He's got kind of the same suspicion you've got, Tim, which it sounds like you have, which is that if you get a more palatable Democrat like a Robert F. Kennedy or Cornel West to left-wing voters on the ballot, will that increase some of the down-ballot turnout? Yeah, I think the answer to that is yes. So in other words, there could be a lift for these Democrats down ballot. And so this is one of the reasons why Republicans should basically stay out of this, just stay out of the whole thing. It could, in the end, result in Joe Biden's loss as Democrats show up and instead pull the lever for Robert F. Kennedy, thus bringing Donald Trump into office. But in the meantime, yeah, you're right. There's some peril in trying to push RFK too hard if you're on the right, because that could mean some problems down ballot. Smart point, and well worth considering. Coming up, Adam Kredo will join us from the Washington Free Beacon. We'll talk to him about how the Biden administration wants to stop you from using the phrase radical Islamist. Huh? Why is that? That's ahead. Hey there, good afternoon to you. 4:35 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up on the program, Matthew Boyle joins us from Breitbart. He'll talk to us at 5 o'clock about RFK's candidacy, his running mate joining the ticket, what she actually believes, and why, of course, she's actually a woman of the left. That's all ahead. And you can join us, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. The Biden administration would like you to stop using the phrase radical Islamist or jihadist. They say the language is very biased and hurtful to Muslim Americans. Why would it be hurtful to Muslim Americans? Are all Muslim Americans jihadists? Is that what the Biden administration is saying? For more on this, I want to turn to Adam Kredo now, senior writer of foreign policy and national security for the Washington Free Beacon, and he joins us now. Hello, Adam.
Hi there. How are you?
Good to have you with us, and thank you for this reporting on this subject. What is the Biden administration doing? What language do they object to here, and how are they objecting to it?
Yeah, so this comes from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the DNI. They're our top spy agency. They handle a lot of covert operations and national security information. The discussion on language and hurtful language, like you so accurately put it, comes from an internal magazine published by the agency by one of its DEI offices, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, this mishmash of words that is now all about policing the way people speak and really promoting, according to critics, this leftist ideology, this woke ideology. And in there, there's a discussion of words that are hurtful, words that should not be said. And like you mentioned, jihadist is in there. Other biased languages, they put it, like radical Islamists. And it's not just terms that apply to the national security sphere. There's other things in there, and it's kind of funny if it wasn't so scary, but they tell you not to use words like blacklisted, cakewalk, brown bag, grandfather. These words, they say, are offensive because they all tie back to racism and slavery and therefore should not be used. So it really runs the gamut of policing language over there.
So you can't use the word blacklist because there's a racial connotation to that just because the word black appears in it?
I can quote to you from this document. It's an internal magazine. They call it The Dive. It was published earlier this year. Blacklisted, they write, implies black is bad and white is good. Cakewalk, they say, is said to refer to, quote unquote, a dance performed by slaves for slave owners on plantation grounds. Brown bag, the term we use for like a brown bag lunch, they say don't use that because it refers to test practices in the 20th century within the African American community in regards to purity. So these words are all verboten as well.
That's like totally insane. I haven't even heard of this particular brown bag test. So maybe I'm historically
I hadn't heard of it.
Maybe I'm just ignorant of that particular thing. I've never heard of that. But as far as I'm aware, brown bag is literally the thing my mom gave me when I went to school every day. It was a lunch bag, and that's how everyone thinks about a brown bag. This is nuts. Why is the United States intelligence community obsessing over policing language in such a whiny way?
You know, this extends far beyond the Biden administration. I think that DEI and the surrounding programs have experienced a boom. They've been funded to the tune of millions of dollars, not just in the DNI, but also across the military, by the Pentagon. It's actually led to recruitment issues because people don't want to be subjected to this type of stuff. But this is a movement that's gone on for years. We've seen over the years the urge by the intelligence community to self-police its own language, to not call radical Islamic terrorism, even though that's what it is, that they're trying to change the context of the language so that they don't offend these communities. You ask, who did they consult on this? Well, they consulted academics who are completely obsessed with DEI and woke language and policing how people speak, and they've consulted with community activists, most likely the Muslim community, which would also tell you that these terms should not be used. And you know, I think it bears noting in the context of this entire document, and I'm sure there are many others, this is just one we got courtesy of a FOIA by the Daily Wire, great work over there. But they also have an anonymous essay from an intelligence officer who writes about why his enjoyment for cross-dressing, wearing women's clothing like bras and high heels, actually makes him a better intel officer. That's in there as well.
Yes, I saw that. That's crazy. This is one of the crazy. Why does the government have internal magazines that tries to indoctrinate for taxpayer-funded employees into this left-wing nonsense? Why is that? Why are we even paying for this?
Well, we've already justified the expense with all these DEI officers. You know, I need to find it in the article, but I believe when I was reading through it, they referenced at least 6 or 7 different DEI offices that collaborated on this. I mean, the positions, these jobs, these people are often funded to the tune of, 6-figure incomes, are sitting in a room and thinking about all these things. They live in a bubble, and they all reinforce their own kind of woke ideology, and this, I think, is the product of it.
They're totally poisonous. They should all be fired. And yet they're gainfully employed by the United States federal government, federal taxpayers. And this magazine, for real, just to emphasize the point you made, Adam, they literally ran an article from an anonymous intel official saying they love cross-dressing and it's made them a better spy. I guess if you're wearing a costume in your capacity as a spy, good for you. But they're straight up claiming that, various LGBTQ gender identifications are great for the intel community. That's such nonsense.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating article. My gender identity and expression make me a better intelligence officer. I'd like to read you a sentence because I think it gives you a window into how these people think and kind of what they're promoting behind the scenes. The guy writes, I now have a better appreciation for how it can be uncomfortable to wear women's clothing sometimes. I know firsthand how wearing heels can make your feet hurt and make it take longer to walk somewhere. Although I like wearing a bra, I know it isn't comfortable for everyone. and is less comfortable after a few hours. On top of the biases that women often face at work, it must be hard to be uncomfortable too.
Whatever happened to just like catching people doing this kind of insane stuff? Like they go like, oh, did you hear what happened with Frank? Yeah, Frank got caught in high heels and a bra. That's insane. Now there's no sense of shame. They're literally writing newsletters where they brag about it. So to be a member of the Intel community means that you have to be a narcissist who wears women's clothing? Is that what we're hearing?
Yeah, it's interesting. I found the specific reference to wearing a bra interesting. This person frames it like he understands women. I think this would actually be offensive to women, that you're assuming that you know what it's like to walk in their shoes, I guess quite literally in this case.
Nuts. So can this continue, or is anyone going to try and stop this insane propaganda from being published at taxpayer expense?
Republicans are very interested in this now. It's one thing I've noticed specifically in the GOP's budget proposals and their funding initiatives. The budget that was sponsored by the Republican Study Committee, the largest GOP caucus, actually went to great strides to eliminate all federal funding for DEI projects, for DEI officers, and things that kind of produce these results. So I would say that while Democrats widely support it and want to do more of this, the GOP definitely has its eye on this funding and is doing what it can to try to cut it out and put the funding back into things like protecting national security and bolstering our military and actually retaining soldiers that we need to fight wars.
Yeah, our federal tax dollars should not be spent on evangelizing mental illness. That's obviously like the worst way to spend our money, and yet that's how they're doing it. Adam Kredo, thank you very much for this report on please keep this coming. If you guys get your hands on more of these crazy newsletters, I can't wait to read what you discover. Thank you very much, Adam Kredo.
Absolutely. Always my pleasure. Thank you.
The Office of the Director of National Intelligence is suggesting that if you want to succeed in the government, you should probably put some high heels on and stop using the phrase radical Islamist, right? Because nothing says intelligence like being incapable of describing a problem. A bunch of Corinne Jean-Pierre's running around. They can't explain anything. They have no idea what they're talking about. Let's see here. John's calling in from Spotsylvania, line 6. Hello, John. You're on the Vince Colonnade Show.
All right, Vince. How you doing? So they don't want to say an extreme Islamists and all, but
right.
They'll call us MAGA extremists. They'll call us Latin Catholic extremists, and they'll call us insurrectionists. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander here. If you want to call us names and define us as a certain kind of character, then why can't we do the same the other way around?
You're totally right. And the whole idea, this is all just a big Marxist effort where they cut off your ability to speak about things that exist in reality, and then they advance fictions and call their political opponents extremists. No question. You're totally right about that. Thank you, John. An excellent point. Jim is calling in from Montclair now, line 2. Jim, good afternoon.
Yeah, Vince, just remember, the same people peddling this linguistic BS are the same ones who call faithful American patriots of faith Christian nationalists.
Yes, all the time. And they're saying we can't say radical Islam because it offends Muslim people. What does that say about their opinion of people who are Muslim, who are not radical jihadists? I mean, the whole thing is totally crazy. And you're exactly right. They, on a routine basis, demonize people of faith as being odd or somehow extremist for believing in God and going to church. Thank you for that. Let me see. Go ahead.
You control the terms of the debate, you control the debate. And that's what they're up to.
You control people's minds if you control vocabulary. That's exactly right. Let's see. Steve is calling in from Woodbridge now, line 7. Steve, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Colonnade Show.
Afternoon. This is just crazy when we think about the fact that the people that work in this office, including the person in this newsletter, have very high-level security clearances. They have access to some of our most sensitive information. They've had to take polygraphs. And, I don't know what the adjudication standards are now, but, I mean, in the past, if you took a polygraph and admitted to some indiscretion, maybe an affair or something like that, you could be disqualified from your position. And yet these people are, as you mentioned, undertaking this narcissistic behavior, this odd, behavior that's indicative of some kind of mild mental illness, and they just kind of waltz on through. I think if they were adjudicated negatively, there'd probably be some sort of repercussions.
Right. So, Steve, you sound like you're familiar with the security clearance process. I mean, does mental illness preclude people from getting a security clearance?
Actually, as long as you have self-referred and you're in treatment, and this was geared toward combat veterans coming back from Afghanistan and Iraq and that kind of thing. If you have PTSD and you say, hey, you admit during that entire process that you self-referred, that's okay as long as your behavior is okay and appropriate.
Yeah. So, but if you're a man who says that you feel fulfilled wearing high heels and bras, that's fine in terms of getting a security clearance.
Yeah, I guess it is, but heterosexual men and women who might admit to some just mild indiscretion could be, putting themselves in jeopardy. They could end up, being adjudicated unfavorably. So it just seems like the scale is tilted way on the side of this behavior, and God forbid they push back because you adjudicate something against a high heel wearing male, and he could probably sue.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's abnormal privilege is what you have. Thank you, Steve.
Exactly.
That's an interesting point and perspective. Thank you for that. Let me see here. I've got Mark calling in from Virginia, line 5. Hello, Mark. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hello, Vince. Thanks for taking my call. You say they're banning blacklist, and I'm wondering if they're banning whitelist or things like white hat and black hat, which are, white hat and black hat might come from old Hollywood Westerns, but now those are common terms in the artificial intelligence community.
Yeah, they seem to imply the very outcome that you're expecting here, which is that you're not allowed to use those terms. You can't use any phrase that includes white or black if it connotes either a positive or a negative trait about it, despite the fact that nobody uses blacklist to refer to black people. That's not in the same universe that people use that language. In fact, it's a pretty common phrase. But this newsletter being distributed by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence suggests that it is now verboten. You're not allowed to do that anymore. And I would imagine that follows for white list and white hat and other similar phrases.
Well, okay. Do they really want to take on the witches? White magic and black magic?
There you go. Yeah, I know. Believe me, your stunned silence just a moment ago is exactly the way I'm feeling too. It's like totally insane. Yeah, this is what we're dealing with. It's completely incoherent. Yeah, it's got another text message. The source says that, during the security clearance investigative process, they usually look for anything that could be used to blackmail. And the fact that this agent wants to stay anonymous, the one who wears high heels, kind of gives you an indication he's concerned that this could be something used to blackmail him. That's a smart point. Also, he points out, my source, that the use of the word blackmail may be forbidden now. We not be able to use that anymore. Mark is calling from Landover Hills, Maryland now, line 2. Mark, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Good afternoon, my good friend Vince. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, Mark. What's on your mind, sir?
Vince, you always make me think. That's why I love listening to you in the afternoon, buddy. And you're making a really good point, and your caller was, too, about them trying to control the dialogue. But they're doing even more than that, Vince. They're trying to control people's thoughts. They think they're the brain police. I mean, where did these people go to school, Vince? Have they ever looked in a dictionary and used a dictionary much? And because I don't think they have, because a lot of the words in there have more than one meaning.
That's true.
People are raised and learn that,
but
they don't even have the common decency to ask for delineation.
I agree with you. But here's the problem, Mark. Even the dictionary itself is now a battlefield for the left. I mean, look how often, like Webster's, you probably grew up with Webster's dictionary, not thinking that it was a political battlefield. Now they're literally changing definitions to fulfill the left's agenda. How about that, Mark?
They do indeed, Vince, and they don't even know, like we say, they don't even know how to use the ones that are in there.
I know. It's wild.
They don't even have the decency to ask, Vince.
You're right about this, Mark. It's a mind control effort. Look at the bloodbath saga, the stupid bloodbath saga last week. Google changed the definition of bloodbath to exclude economic descriptions after Donald Trump used it to describe an economic event in the United States. That's how far the left is willing to go. The right, there's like asleep at the switch, by and large. Not Mark. Mark's awake. Coming up, we're going to talk to Matt Boyle over at Breitbart about the impact that RFK Jr. and his running mate will have on 2024. It's an important conversation ahead.